You think ninjas were just mysterious assassins jumping from rooftop to rooftop, but their deadliest skill wasn't killing. It was disappearing completely for months in hostile mountain terrain where one wrong move meant certain death. Let me tell you something that will change everything you thought you knew about these shadow warriors. Picture this. It's 1467, feudal Japan. A ninja named Takeshi receives a scroll that makes his blood run cold. His mission? Infiltrate the enemy clan's mountain fortress and gather intelligence for 3 months without being detected even once. Failure means not just his death, but the destruction of his entire village. What he's about to face in those unforgiving peaks will test every survival technique passed down through generations of shadow warriors. Here's what nobody tells you about ninja survival. It wasn't about fancy weapons or mystical powers. It was about becoming one with nature so completely that even the mountains themselves forgot you existed. But how do you survive for months in terrain that kills experienced mountain climbers in days? The first challenge hits you immediately: finding water without leaving any trace of your presence. Mountain streams might seem obvious, but here's where most people get it wrong. Drinking directly from streams was basically announcing your location to every tracker within miles. Ninjas had to think like ghosts who needed water but couldn't disturb a single pebble. Takeshi learned this the hard way during his first mountain mission. He was 19, overconfident, and nearly got himself killed by drinking from what seemed like an isolated stream. What he didn't know was that the enemy clan had posted sentries specifically to watch water sources. The splash he made while cupping water alerted guards who spent the next 6 hours hunting for intruders. Smart ninjas developed what they called morning dew collection, a technique so subtle it left no trace whatsoever. They would lay out specially woven cloth strips before dawn, positioned to catch moisture from the air. As the sun rose and temperatures shifted, condensation would collect on these cloths. A single night could yield enough water for an entire day, and the process was completely silent. But here's where it gets interesting and slightly gross. When dew collection wasn't enough, ninjas turned to something that would make modern survival experts cringe. They collected rainwater using their own clothing as funnels, directing every precious drop into bamboo containers hidden in their gear. The smell wasn't exactly pleasant after weeks of this routine, but staying alive mattered more than personal hygiene. The most ingenious technique involved what ninjas called tree wells, natural depressions around large tree trunks where rainwater collected and filtered through layers of fallen leaves. This water was cleaner than most streams, and accessing it left virtually no footprints. Takeshi discovered that certain trees, particularly ancient oaks, created the best natural water storage systems, but water was just the beginning of their survival challenges. The real test came when hunger struck and finding food meant the difference between completing the mission and becoming another skeleton in the mountains. Traditional hunting was completely out of the question. Arrows and traps left evidence, and killing large animals created sounds that echoed for miles. Ninjas had to master what we might call invisible foraging, techniques that would make modern botanists envious of their knowledge of mountain plants. Every ninja memorized hundreds of edible plants, but more importantly, they knew exactly how to harvest them without leaving obvious signs. Instead of pulling entire plants, they would carefully remove only specific leaves or roots, allowing the plant to continue growing naturally. To an untrained eye, these plants looked completely untouched. Mountain berries became a staple, but here's the clever part. Ninjas never harvested all the berries from a single bush. They would take only a few from each plant across a wide area, creating a harvesting pattern that looked like natural wildlife consumption rather than human activity. Then there were the mushrooms. Certain fungi grew in the deep shadows of mountain forests, and ninjas became experts at identifying dozens of edible varieties. But the real skill was in the harvesting technique. They would slice mushrooms at the base rather than pulling them up, leaving the root system intact so new mushrooms would continue growing. Pine nuts were another crucial food source, especially during winter months. Ninjas developed special tools for extracting nuts from pine cones without damaging the cone structure. They could process enough nuts to last for days while leaving the forest floor looking completely natural. But perhaps the most impressive foraging technique involved what ninjas called bamboo heart extraction. Young bamboo shoots provided excellent nutrition, but removing them incorrectly would create obvious gaps in bamboo groves. Master ninjas could extract the tender inner portions of bamboo stalks using thin blades, leaving the outer structure intact and growing. The psychological aspect of constant foraging was just as challenging as the physical demands. Imagine spending every waking moment calculating calories, identifying plants, and planning your next meal while simultaneously avoiding detection by trained warriors who knew these mountains like their own homes. Takeshi's journal entries from his 3-month mission reveal the mental strain. Day 47. Found a patch of wild onions today, but could only take enough for one small meal. The hunger gnaws constantly, but discipline keeps me alive. The enemy patrol passed within 20 paces of my hiding spot while I was foraging. They never suspected a shadow moved among the plants they walked past, but food and water were luxury problems compared to the real killer in mountain environments. Exposure to the elements. One cold night could end everything, and staying warm without creating smoke or other signs of human presence required techniques that bordered on supernatural. Ninjas couldn't build traditional fires. The smoke would be visible for miles, and the smell would alert every guard within the territory. Instead, they mastered what they called heat without flame techniques that kept them alive through freezing mountain nights. The foundation of ninja warmth was understanding body heat retention at a level that would impress modern thermal engineers. They developed layering systems using natural materials that created insulation without bulk. Dried grass, collected carefully to avoid obvious harvesting patterns, was woven into thin mats that could be worn under clothing. But here's where ninja ingenuity really shined. They discovered that certain combinations of plants, when properly prepared, could generate heat through natural chemical reactions. Mixing specific types of tree bark with water and wrapping the mixture in cloth created heat packs that stayed warm for hours without any flame or smoke. Animal fat, when available, became crucial for more than just nutrition. Ninjas would rub small amounts of fat on their skin to create an insulating layer, focusing on pulse points where heat loss was greatest. The technique was uncomfortable and certainly not pleasant smelling, but it could mean the difference between surviving a cold night and never waking up. Underground sleeping chambers represented the pinnacle of ninja survival engineering. Using nothing but basic tools and incredible patience, they would excavate small caves beneath large rocks or tree roots. These chambers were designed to retain body heat while remaining completely invisible from the surface. The construction process was meticulous. Every handful of displaced earth had to be scattered naturally across the forest floor. The entrance would be camouflaged with carefully arranged stones and vegetation. Inside, ninjas would line the chamber with dried materials for insulation and create small air vents that prevented suffocation while releasing no detectable heat signatures. Takeshi spent 3 weeks perfecting his first underground chamber, working only during daylight hours when enemy patrols were less active. The finished hideout was barely large enough for one person, but provided enough warmth to survive even the coldest mountain nights. More importantly, it was positioned near a natural spring and within range of several foraging areas. But creating these shelters required another skill that separated master ninjas from amateurs: the ability to work in complete silence for hours at a time. Every scrape of stone, every snap of a branch could alert sentries to their presence. Ninjas trained for years to control not just their movements, but even their breathing, while performing complex construction tasks. The mental discipline required for this kind of work was extraordinary. Imagine digging a survival chamber one handful of dirt at a time, knowing that a single carelessly placed footstep could expose your location to enemies trained to hunt and kill intruders. The meditation techniques ninjas used to maintain focus during these operations were as important as their physical skills. Sleeping itself became a calculated risk. Ninjas never slept through entire nights. Instead, they practiced controlled microsleep sessions, never unconscious for more than 2 hours at a time. This sleep pattern kept them alert to danger while still providing enough rest to function effectively. But even the most perfectly constructed shelter couldn't solve the biggest challenge ninjas faced during extended mountain missions: staying hidden from human trackers who knew every trail, every cave, and every possible hiding spot in their territory. The art of remaining undetected went far beyond simply hiding in bushes. Ninjas had to understand and counter every technique their enemies used to hunt intruders. This meant thinking like a tracker while moving like a ghost, anticipating where searches would focus while leaving absolutely no trace of their presence. Enemy patrols followed predictable patterns, but understanding these patterns required weeks of careful observation. Ninjas would position themselves in elevated locations, often spending entire days motionless while memorizing guard rotations, route changes, and timing patterns. One small mistake in pattern recognition could place them directly in the path of a patrol. Footprint management became an obsession. Different types of soil, rock, and vegetation required completely different movement techniques. Ninjas learned to read terrain like a map, identifying which surfaces would hold footprints and which would naturally disguise their passage. On soft ground, they used a technique called shadow stepping, placing their feet only in areas where natural depressions already existed, such as deer tracks or water runoff channels. On hard surfaces, they wore special soft-soled footwear that distributed weight evenly and left minimal impressions. But here's what most people don't understand about ninja stealth. It wasn't just about silent movement. It was about understanding the entire ecosystem of the mountain environment and moving in harmony with natural patterns that already existed. Wild animals became both allies and threats in this delicate balance. Ninjas learned to time their movements with natural animal activity, using the sounds of wind, flowing water, and wildlife to mask any noise they might make. But disturbing animal patterns could alert experienced trackers that something unnatural was happening in their territory. Takeshi wrote about a close call during his second month. Dawn patrol passed while I was gathering bark from an old pine. A family of squirrels had been active in the area, dropping pine cones and creating natural cover sounds. I froze completely as the guards investigated the noise, but they concluded it was normal forest activity. The squirrels inadvertently saved my mission and my life. Scent control presented another layer of complexity. Human smell could linger for hours in mountain air, especially in areas with poor ventilation between peaks. Ninjas used combinations of local plants to mask their natural odors, but this process required extensive knowledge of which plants were common in specific areas and seasons. Smoke from distant cooking fires could carry human scent for miles in mountain winds. Ninjas had to constantly monitor wind patterns and adjust their routes to avoid carrying their own scent toward enemy positions. This meant sometimes taking much longer, more dangerous paths to maintain complete concealment. The psychological pressure of constant vigilance was perhaps the most challenging aspect of extended mountain missions. Every moment required split-second decisions about movement, sound, and visibility. The mental strain of maintaining perfect stealth for months while surviving in harsh conditions broke many ninjas before physical hardships ever became fatal. But the most skilled shadow warriors developed meditation techniques that allowed them to maintain razor-sharp focus while managing the stress of constant danger. These mental disciplines were closely guarded secrets, passed down through generations of ninja clans and practiced daily throughout their lives. Part of surviving undetected meant understanding exactly when and how to move through enemy territory. Timing became everything. A science that required understanding not just human patrol patterns, but weather conditions, wildlife behavior, and even the phases of the moon. Night movement sounds logical, but experienced ninja knew that darkness alone wasn't enough protection. Many enemy forces specifically increased patrols during new moon periods, knowing that intruders would expect better concealment. Master ninjas learned to identify the optimal movement windows, times when natural conditions provided maximum concealment while patrol activity was at its lowest. Weather patterns became crucial intelligence. Overcast nights provided excellent concealment, but they also muffled sound differently than clear nights. Rain could mask movement noise but also made surfaces slippery and unpredictable. Wind was both friend and enemy. It could cover the sound of footsteps while simultaneously carrying scent toward enemy positions. Takeshi's mission logs reveal the complexity of these timing decisions. Heavy fog rolled in from the eastern valleys tonight. Visibility dropped to arm's length, perfect for approaching the fortress walls. But the moisture made every surface treacherous, and my movements had to be twice as deliberate. What should have been a 2-hour reconnaissance became a 6-hour ordeal, but I gathered intelligence on 3 guard positions without detection. Seasonal changes added another layer of complexity to extended missions. Spring brought new vegetation that could provide cover or concealment, but it also brought increased animal activity that could mask movement or accidentally reveal human presence. Summer offered abundant food sources, but required different camouflage techniques. Fall created noise problems with dry leaves, but provided excellent natural coloration for concealment. Winter was simultaneously the most challenging and most concealing season. The most successful ninjas became masters of what they called environmental rhythm, understanding the natural pace and patterns of mountain life so completely that they could move as part of the ecosystem rather than as intruders within it. But beyond basic survival and concealment, ninjas on extended mountain missions had to maintain their physical and mental capabilities for combat. Staying hidden was meaningless if they weren't ready to fight when necessary or complete their intelligence-gathering objectives. Training couldn't stop during missions. In fact, it became more important than ever. Ninjas developed exercise routines that could be performed in complete silence within the confines of their hiding places. These weren't gentle stretching exercises, but intense conditioning programs designed to maintain combat readiness despite limited space and resources. Strength training used the environment itself. Rock lifting, tree branch exercises, and isometric techniques that used body weight against natural resistance provided ways to maintain muscle mass and power during extended periods of limited activity. Flexibility training was even more crucial. Long hours spent motionless in cramped hiding spaces could reduce mobility and reaction speed. Ninjas practiced stretching and movement routines that could be performed silently and in minimal space, often during the safest hours of pre-dawn darkness. Mental training was equally important. Meditation techniques weren't just for stress management, they were tools for maintaining the split-second reaction times and decision-making abilities that kept ninjas alive in dangerous situations. These practices also helped maintain the incredible patience required for successful intelligence gathering. Combat skills required constant practice. Ninjas would spend hours practicing weapon techniques in slow motion, maintaining muscle memory, and refining movements without creating any sound or visible activity. They practiced fighting techniques using imaginary opponents, rehearsing responses to different combat scenarios they might encounter. But perhaps the most important skill was intelligence analysis. Information gathering was meaningless without the ability to understand and prioritize what they observed. Ninjas developed systems for organizing and remembering complex details about enemy strengths, weaknesses, plans, and vulnerabilities. The physical demands of mountain survival were challenging enough, but ninjas also had to process and retain vast amounts of tactical information while operating under extreme stress and deprivation. They memorized guard rotations, supply routes, defensive weaknesses, and communication patterns, all while surviving on minimal food and water in harsh conditions. Takeshi's final mission report demonstrates the scope of intelligence that skilled ninjas could gather. Fortress defenses include 47 permanent guards with rotating shifts every 6 hours. Eastern wall shows signs of recent repair, potential weakness for future assault. Supply caravans arrive every 12 days via the northern trail. Commander's quarters face the central courtyard with 2 guard positions but no rear security during morning hours. This level of detailed intelligence gathered over 3 months of undetected observation could change the outcome of entire military campaigns. But collecting it required surviving challenges that would have killed ordinary soldiers within days. The techniques ninjas developed for extended mountain survival represent some of the most sophisticated wilderness skills ever documented. These weren't just methods for staying alive, they were systems for maintaining complete invisibility while gathering crucial intelligence in hostile territory. Modern special forces units study ninja survival techniques because they remain remarkably effective even with today's advanced detection technology. The fundamental principles of living in harmony with natural environments while avoiding human detection are timeless skills that transcend any particular era or technology. But beyond their practical applications, these techniques reveal something profound about human adaptability and determination. Ninjas who survived months-long mountain missions didn't just master survival skills, they transcended normal human limitations through discipline, training, and an almost supernatural understanding of their environment. The next time you look at a mountain wilderness and think about what it would take to survive there for months without any outside support, remember that centuries ago, shadow warriors were doing exactly that, while simultaneously conducting complex intelligence operations and maintaining combat readiness. Their methods weren't magic, they were the result of generations of accumulated knowledge, rigorous training, and the kind of mental discipline that few people ever develop. Every technique was tested under life and death conditions, where failure meant not just personal death, but potentially the destruction of everything they were sworn to protect. These mountain survival techniques were just one part of a larger ninja skill set that included urban infiltration, psychological warfare, and dozens of specialized combat techniques. But mastering survival in the mountains was considered the ultimate test of a ninja's abilities because it required every skill they possessed while providing no margin for error. Today, when we think about ninjas, we often focus on their weapons and fighting techniques, but their real power came from their ability to become invisible, not just in shadows and darkness, but in the natural world itself. They could disappear so completely that even the mountains forgot they existed, emerging only when their missions were complete with intelligence that could change the course of history. The legend of the ninja isn't just about warriors in black masks jumping between buildings. It's about human beings who pushed the boundaries of what was possible, developing skills and techniques that allowed them to survive and thrive in conditions that would challenge even modern technology and equipment. Their mountain survival methods remain relevant today because they're based on fundamental principles of adaptation, observation, and harmony with natural systems. These aren't just historical curiosities. They're proven techniques for surviving in hostile environments while maintaining operational effectiveness. The next time you hear stories about ninja abilities that seem almost supernatural, remember that they were based on very real skills developed through years of training and refinement. Their seemingly magical ability to appear and disappear wasn't magic at all. It was the result of mastering survival techniques so advanced that they remain impressive, even by today's standards. Those shadow warriors who survived months in hostile mountains weren't just tough, They were the product of training systems and knowledge that represented centuries of accumulated wisdom about human survival in the most challenging conditions imaginable.